what is it that makes it come alive so that it's not just a shot of a coffee cup, but that it's something that exists within the organism of the whole movie, and that surprises. Even a shot of a coffee cup can surprise.
In addition to writing essays, collaborating with Martin Scorsese, and directing several documentaries, including Hitchcock Truffaut, Kent Jones served as the director of New York Film Festival for 7 years before dedicating himself fully to filmmaking. I got to know Kent's work through going to the New York Film Festival and watching him moderate these incredible conversations with filmmakers I admire. And with his debut feature, Diane, and when it came out in 2018, I had the pleasure of attending a screening at the IFC Center, moderated by Michael Moore, which was
Mhm.
incredible. The film struck me then, and it struck me even harder watching it again last week on the other side of the pandemic and various life events. It's a really special and incredible film. So it's an honor to have you here, Ken.
I'm happy to be here.
I understand that the idea for this movie, you've been carrying it with you since childhood and it's evolved over time. Can you bring us back to the original spark for the idea for Diane?
Yeah, I gotta get myself back in that frame of mind because I just wrapped my new movie. Well, childhood in the sense that I grew up around the people that the film is about, but then I started putting pen to paper when I was a teenager because it was a real, you know, there was a large family, predominantly women, that really did grow up in the middle of the wilderness and the Canadian border, and they all went through living that life themselves and then endured the Depression. And they all stuck together throughout and stayed very close. And then I was an only child. My mother was an only child. In fact, my father was an only child. How about that? But
Hmm.
uh, to me, they were my aunts, even though they were my great aunts. There was no, differentiation between, those designations. And uh, they were a real force and a kind of they loomed in my life almost like, queens and kings or something. They were not in the sense that they were rulers, just that they were ever present, and the feeling of their words and their movements, their gestures, the way that they were with each other, with me, with my cousins, it left a lasting impression on me. And so I started thinking about it at a very early age about how to, because I loved movies from the time I was really a little kid. And so I started, making notes about that. And it was always on my mind. But then when I saw The Rainmaker by Coppola in the late 90s and I saw Mary Kay Place in it, I thought, well, if I do this, it has to be for her and with her. That was, almost 20 years between the time, that I saw the film, and then I met Mary Kay just by chance. And I
Yeah.
said, I've had this in mind for a very, very long time. And she's like, wow, I'm flattered, and well, call me when you have a script. And I started really working on the a real draft in Paris, finishing up post on Hitchcock Truffaut, before I went to Cannes with it, and right after my mother had died.
Hmm.
So um, then it was, another matter trying to get it financed.
What was it about Mary Kay Place that really jumped out to you and helped solidify the project?
Well, it certainly wasn't her Oklahoma twang, but she had lost most of that. Mary Kay obviously came from comedy. When people come from comedy, they tend to. It's interesting. There was an interview with Jackie Gleason that I saw not too long ago on YouTube, and he said, "Why is it that Johnny Carson asked him, why is it that all the, great comics are great actors?" And he said, "Yeah, that's true. And how come it is that all the great actors are terrible comics, lousy comics?" And I mean, having a sense of comedy and a sense of irony, it really does inject something emotionally into a performance. And it also there's a sense of discipline behaviorally that I think is really crucial too.
And
Yeah.
Jake Lacey too is incredible in the film. Does he come from comedy? I'm not. Sure, I know his
Well,
back.
I don't know. I don't know if you can say that he comes from comedy, but it's fun. I just worked with Jake again. It was great. He came in for
Oh,
a day.
cool.
Yeah. I saw Jake in this movie, The Obvious Child. I thought he was amazing in a role that played by almost any other actor wouldn't have been so amazing. I think he gave it something. I can't quite say what it was, but I was really, really, really impressed with him. Um, he was the thing that left the greatest impression on me. Then when I was casting that role, it was Oren Moverman who actually made Diane possible. It's because of Oren that the film got
Mhm.
made. He's the one who recommended Jake. He had never worked with Jake on a film, but he had done table reads with him. And Jake and I met, and we really hit it off right away. And he understood what I was going after and what the character was. And so but it was just The Obvious Child. That was it.
Mhm. So when you actually went out to make this movie, you wrote it based on your experiences growing up in Massachusetts, but you, for tax reasons, had to shoot it in upstate New York. I wonder if that was a difficult creative adjustment for you to make, or if that was something you were able to make that sense of place felt authentically in upstate New York.
Um, it's a different place, but it's close enough in spirit and in the distances that one has to drive, and in not the landscape itself. Those mountains are quite different from the Berkshire Mountains, but in the presence of the mountains, the way that the houses look, the diners and things like that. So let's say that it's a parallel.
You made this in 20 days. If you
Mhm.
can think back to being a first-time narrative filmmaker, what were those challenges and surprises that jumped out at you the most?
I'll start by saying that I started late, obviously, with narrative cinema. I had it in mind since I was a kid. Why I didn't, you know, make a movie sooner is there are a lot of factors involved. Some personal, some just, the way that my life went, but mostly personal, I think. But I have to say that I'm kind of glad that I didn't start when I was young because the movies that I would have made when I was young, I myself probably wouldn't have liked very much. A lot of people have asked me about, the whole what is it like to be a critic and then, make movies? Did the criticism inform the movie making? Did your knowledge of cinema, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, first of all, it wasn't that unusual. As a matter of fact, there was a long tradition of it in France,
Oh, for
and
sure.
I knew a lot of those people from the second generation. I mean, some of them are among my closest friends, and I think that that was just a natural thing. That's gone now, but I mean, it was very uh, it was something that I was very tuned into myself. So I always thought of it in that way, in the sense that I was never interested in criticism per se, in the sense of like thumbs up, thumbs down, or dictating taste or something like that. I was more interested in uh, finding people who hadn't been recognized, I thought, adequately, and kind of, you know, people who interested me, who impassioned me, really, in the case of, say, Olivier Assayas or
Mhm.
Darjan Bayev, and then really like, plunging into their work. And then really getting as close as I could to what the actual experience of filmmaking is, as opposed to the idea of it that a lot of people have.
Mhm.
Common in the circles where I traveled was the idea that, like, the director dictated everything. It's not untrue, but what that means is quite different from what people think, in the sense
Right.
that, and I knew that, you know, going in, in the sense that, like, it's not that, when people say, well, film is a collaborative medium, it's like, yeah, it's a collaborative medium for sure. But part of that collaboration is that there's one person who's the unifying factor. You can call that person the director. The term director doesn't really, isn't really adequate in the sense that you're not, I mean, yes, I suppose there are moments when you give people line readings. There are moments when I've never done it myself, but where you say, walk 3 paces, close your eyes, the kind of stuff that Sternberg did with Dietrich or, you know, but I also think that it involves, well, I know that it involves listening. It involves tuning yourself into the people around you, getting on their wavelength. It involves acting very, very quickly, particularly on a 20-day schedule. And it involves, making a decision right away, and there is no such thing as a right or wrong one. You just make a decision.
Mhm.
So I think um, there was a moment, and I've talked to my sons about it, where I was sort of like sitting there as a shot was being set up and it was complicated and I hadn't, I was sort of like thinking to myself, oh no, I wonder if I can really do this. And then I thought to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter what your feelings are arising. You just have to do it. And so, that was a nice moment. In the case of Diane, what I was doing was preserving something very particular about a kind of a way of talking, a way of relating to each other, kind of people that really aren't around anymore. But it was very important to me to preserve it.
Mhm. Knowing as many world-class filmmakers as you do, when it came time to make this film, did you seek any advice? And is there any advice that you've gotten from them over the years that you'd be willing to share with us about being a filmmaker?
I shared it with a couple people um, and got some input from them that was just very general, but it was more to just sort of share it. On the other hand, um, with Marty, it was different. Marty and I are, that's an old relationship. It goes back to 1991, and uh, we've worked very closely over the years. And he's one of the people in this world that I love the most and that I trust the most. So he and I went through the film twice. We sat down and watched it. He said, "Okay, now we're going to go through it again and stop, and we're going to talk about this and that and that." Um, did I do everything that he thought I should have done? Sometimes I did, sometimes not. But the point is that we both looked at it together, and that was very valuable to me,
Hmm.
at the least.
Yeah. Having made Diane and going into your new project, what can you tell us about it? What was it like to go at this a second time?
Right before COVID, I wrote out a draft that I really liked um, for a film that I wanted to make, and that I will make someday with Ariana DeBose and Gillian Anderson. But it's a tougher sell. Um, and because it's a New York movie, New York is expensive, as I just learned, and New York City, meaning. And so I was at some point, like a year ago, no, over a year ago, I got a call from Killer, and I was asked if I read other people's scripts, and I said, well, I mean, sometime, you can try me, and so. They sent me the script and I liked it. And, I had never read the Schnitzler novella, but I went out and bought it before I read the script actually. And I knew a little bit of his work. And Sammy and I met and Sammy Birch, who wrote the script, and that was cool. And then, it was offered to me. And then we just spent a long time trying to put it together.
Well, I cannot wait to see it. I hope everything goes well with the editing. Have you started that process yet, or are you taking a breather?
Um, I popped into the room a couple times when we were shooting. Uh, and Mike Solomon, who cut Diane and who cut the conversations that after the episodes of Saints, he and I worked together a lot. And so he's cutting it. And yesterday I went into the room and looked at the first assembly. And this thing that George Lucas said, if you look at your first assembly and you don't want to run to the bathroom and throw up, then something's wrong. I didn't want to run to the bathroom and throw up, but I was just sort of like, oh, well, okay. But then we went right to work on one scene, and then the film started to, it started to come alive. So,
Great.
mm.
You mentioned driving earlier back to Diane, and I just want to comment on the unexpected power of those driving shots,
Mm.
and just ask you about those and the way that those came about because they're really striking.
There's something that Marty's always said that's fundamentally it's at the core of, filmmaking. It's a story that he told, he's told it about different things, but there's a story that he told about making Cape Fear. There was going to be a close-up of Nick Nolte's eyes looking through the porthole of the boat, having risen back from, the waters to come and save his wife and daughter from De Niro. And Freddie Francis set up the shot, and Marty looked, you know, through the camera at that point, or at the video, set up, and he said, "Well, it's nice, but all it is a shot of eyes looking through a porthole. You know, what it, you know." And then they talked about it, and then Freddie Francis said, "I have an idea." You said, "What about one eye?" He said, "Okay, that's interesting." So the thing is that if there's, if you say, "Here's a shot of a coffee cup on a table. We need a shot of a coffee cup on a table here." You just say, "Okay, why?" Why do you need a shot of a coffee cup on a table? What kind of coffee cup is it? All those questions. But then also, what is it that makes it come alive so that it's not just a shot of a coffee cup, but that it's something that exists within the organism of the whole movie, and that surprises. Even a shot of a coffee cup can surprise. It depends on how it lays. It depends on where it sits in relation to what comes before it and what comes after it, how many frames the previous shot is versus how many frames the next shot is, and then adjusting accordingly. But it's an interesting lesson. And I think that with the driving, on the one hand, there's okay, you live in a place and you got to drive all over the place, right? On the other hand, the feeling of those drives is quite different from driving through, Manhattan or Brooklyn or something, or quite different from driving down a highway in Texas or Montana. Um, Going over those hills, and doing it in a kind of a ritualized way. And then it becomes punctuation for your days. You go to this place, then you drive somewhere and you go to the next place, and then you drive back and etc. Okay. And then at a certain point, and it really, I suppose it's in the script. I don't remember, but I did, it had to become something else. And also I wanted to see her behind the wheel just once. I didn't want to constantly be going to her behind the wheel because why?
Mhm.
All you needed to do was see it once at that moment. It's very strange because I watched it that night with Michael, I think. I think I did. I don't remember. And that was a great night, by the way, at IFC because Michael was sick and he got up out of bed and came and did it. But uh I was watching it and I thought, wow, what I think I had another film in the back of my mind, as a model, but I wonder what it was, and I thought, was it an Abbas Kiarostami movie? I don't think so, I mean, and was it this movie? And then like a year later or a year and a half later, it dawned on me that it was Alain René's last movie, um, called The Life of Riley here. That,
Hmm.
you know, um,
Right.
it was interesting. So anyway.
Some filmmakers claim to be very conscious of their influences. I'm always a little bit suspicious of that. Were there films that were consciously on your mind while making this, or was it just a situation where you were pulling on your vast knowledge of film in more unconscious ways, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, when people say influence, um, and they say that, and they start talking about their influences, I balk at that because I
Me
feel
too.
like, you know, it just
Yeah.
doesn't. What does it mean? Does it mean that you're, positioning yourself in relation to another filmmaker as a sort of uh, a pupil?
Mhm.
Uh, what would be the point? I mean, it's great to study people, I mean, and to know. certainly having seen a lot of films, I would never pretend that it wasn't, a big part of who I am and a big, certainly, you know, armed me with lots of, choices and counter choices and also things that I knew that there were certain things that I admired, but that I would never have wanted to pursue that other people did and et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think that in this case, the question of influence is unconscious. I just wasn't thinking of it, at all. Uh, in other cases, with this film, I did say to the DP, okay, I'm going to talk to Jim Jarmusch. I'm going to ask him what he did for Patterson, and we'll act accordingly. But that's not a question of influence. That's a question
Yeah.
of seeing something that seemed like a good model to work from. What were the lenses? And he told me about putting, old hosiery over the lens to give it a kind of a diffuse look and sort of like, great. The DP totally got into that,
Mm.
getting quick prime lenses. And so, there's a moment when I copied something that Orson Welles did, but I certainly didn't do it as an homage. I did it because it just seemed like the right thing to do. There's a camera movement, and at the diner when she encounters
Mm.
Jake. Um, but it wasn't even, it's not even a matter of copying Orson Welles. It's just sort of a matter of like, okay, this is an idea. The camera moves in that seems to be from her POV and then she walks into it. And I'm not even sure if I used that part of it. Um,
Mm.
right. So
Has your relationship to film and film watching changed at all over the years, particularly recently as you've stepped away from your programming duties?
my programming duties. The thing about that, the part that I didn't enjoy was saying no
Hmm.
at all. I didn't enjoy being like, seen as an arbiter of taste. I was just, my job as I interpreted it was I'm programming it. So yes, of course it's going to reflect my taste, but that's only not because, I want it to. It's because that's what they asked me to do. Um, it also reflected the taste of the other people on the committee. Some things I did unilaterally because I just wasn't, you know, with the revivals, stuff like that. I did not enjoy that. I have never enjoyed it. I have never enjoyed sitting down and watching, five movies in a row, and rendering judgment on them. And it's the thing that I don't like about film festivals. The minute it's over, you're surrounded by people. What'd you think of that? I thought it was better than his last film. And you're just sort of like, can I take about 5 years before I give you an answer?
Right.
You have to make judgments. And then, when you're with the New York Film Festival, even with a festival that small, where the selection is that small in relation to something like Toronto or Cannes or, Venice, there's still a lot to watch. And I didn't enjoy the brutality of it. I really didn't. I
Mhm.
certainly enjoyed, presenting filmmakers, the conversations with filmmakers, et cetera. But yeah, I don't miss that kind of film watching.
Are there conversations that you had over the years that really jump out to you as like truly, truly special?
James Gray is a really close friend, and any conversation with him uh, is great because he's so fucking funny. So, I remember once it was there was a Q&A, and someone around the time of Lost City of Z, and someone raised their hands and said, I was wondering how, if you could talk about what it was like to work with Amazon. And James said, well, my relationship with Amazon goes back a long way. It started with paper towels. Then I worked my way up to batteries and books. And now, you know, I've made a movie for them. Um, Obviously it got a big laugh. Uh, I don't know, I mean, when there are people that, with Hitchcock Truffaut, those were all people that I knew. The reason that I chose them to talk to them was because I knew that they were people who had deep, you know, a profound relationship to that book, or in the case of Rick Linklater, to the films. Um, well, even Rick, I mean, he really had a deep-seated relationship to that book. And they were, and I also wanted people who were able to speak extemporaneously. There's nothing worse than a film that calls itself a documentary where people open their mouths and you feel like what they're saying has been predetermined in some way. I wanted people to just speak their minds and then it would make it organically and build from one interview to the next, you know? And so, um, and it was all based on that. Um, when, you know, so over the years, it's been great to do events with people that I know, that I've known, for a long time, and it's an ongoing conversation, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, with Olivier, with Luc and Jean-Pierre Dardenne, with Claire Denis, with uh, David Fincher, with Marty, obviously. That's a conversation that's just endless. That's what's meaningful to me. How
Mhm.
much people got it, maybe there are other things that people, you know, liked in different ways. But I mean, look, I was just the guy up there asking questions. They made the films. So.